Hey everybody, welcome back to the Catholic Masterclass. This week we're looking at the Mass as a sacrifice. And this is actually a really big topic. It's one of those things that separates us as Catholics from non-Catholics. If you ask a non-Catholic what they're doing when they go to worship on Sunday, the last answer that you will hear is that they're offering sacrifice to God. In fact, this was one of the big reasons for the Protestant Reformation, for Martin Luther and John Calvin and John Wesley to break from the Catholic Church, because they understood that the Catholic understanding of worship at Mass is that it's a sacrifice. And they understood it as like, no, that can't be it. That's not what it's supposed to be. So they broke off and they have a different understanding. And it's an unfortunate thing that has caused problems for the Christian community. Nonetheless, we're trying to explain the Catholic understanding of worship. And so that's what we're looking at. So when we think of sacrifice, we think probably of Old Testament worship. We think of like in the temple, and they're offering all these bulls and goats and lambs in sacrifice. There's like blood and guts everywhere. And that's true that there were those bloody sacrifices. There were also, though, unbloody sacrifices. If you read your Old Testament, you'll sometimes see like a grain offering or a cereal offering, or you'll see this thing called the bread of the presence, or the show bread that you might recognize. Anyway, these were sacrifices that were also offered by the priests in an unbloody way. So in the temple, there were bloody sacrifices and there were unbloody sacrifices. And that's an important thing to understand. But before we get to that, let's go back in time a little bit. So back to the beginning of the story with Cain and Abel. They are born from Adam and Eve, of course, and they become young men, and they both take on different professions, we could say. We would call them professions. They would just say trades or, whatever. But like Cain was a farmer, a tiller of the soil, and Abel was a shepherd, a keeper of animals. And when they have their respective things, their crop and their flock, they both understand we need to offer worship to God, and they both understand that their worship needs to be sacrificial. That they need to offer something to God that is more than just lip service, but they actually need to offer something that is precious to them, something that is worth their value, to show that God is worth more to them than these things are. And so Cain, it says, makes an offering from his crop, and it says that Abel makes an offering of the best firstlings from his flock. And because Abel offers the thing that is more precious, he offers his best, his first. He offers that to God in worship. It says that God looks favorably upon Abel's worship, more favorably than he looks upon Cain's worship. And that causes problems, of course. But the point here is just to point out that when it comes to offering sacrifice to God, that when we offer something that is more precious to him, out of love, out of devotion, out of worship, there's a greater aspect of favorability that comes from God. It's not that we're earning something. It's just that we're showing God like how much he's worth to us. This covenant relationship, this family relationship, we say like, Father, you're my father, and there's no one else who can take that role. And so I even offer this thing that is precious to me. And later on in the story, we'll talk more about this next week, but later on in the story, God actually establishes a system of sacrificial worship. And this is what we think of, the blood and the guts of the bulls and the animals and all these different things. And we understand from the Old Testament that when the priests are offering these animals in sacrifice, there's a way of like symbolically offering themselves in union with the animals. It's like a symbolic sort of thing, a ritualized self-offering, we could say. And if that's true, you can think of like being a priest and you're intentionally focused on this. Like, okay, I know that in offering this lamb or this bull or this goat in sacrifice to God, I know that in doing this, I'm symbolically sacrificing myself. That's a precious gift to give to God, and that's pleasing to him. But there are also, like I said, unbloody sacrifices, the bread and the grain offerings. And the priest would also offer those to God in sacrifice. As though like saying like, okay, this represents our food. This represents our source of life. And we offer that in sacrifice to God. It's like pretty incredible, pretty precious, actually. Okay, so now what happens? Jesus comes along and he establishes a new form of worship in the new covenant, where he does two things. So first, at the Last Supper on Holy Thursday, at the Last Supper, he takes bread and he takes wine with his disciples, and he says, "Take this and eat it. This is my body, which will be given up for you. Take this and drink it. This is the chalice of my blood, which will be poured out for you." So at the Last Supper, what's he doing? He's instituting an unbloody sacrifice. Because in connecting it with Good Friday, the crucifixion, which they hadn't experienced yet, but in connecting it with that, he's saying this is my body, which is given up. It's sacrificed for you. This is my blood poured out for you, sacrificed for you. This is it. And then at the crucifixion, what happens? He offers himself as a bloody self-sacrifice. He truly does. He doesn't symbolically offer his life to God in sacrifice, but he truly does offer his life to God in sacrifice. Offers his life to the Father. So in connecting the Eucharist, the unbloody sacrifice, with the bloody sacrifice of the crucifixion, Jesus is establishing this union that takes place whenever they follow his command to what? To do this in memory of me, he says. Do this. And what happens is we see this in the early church. His apostles, his disciples understood that when Jesus says, do this in memory of me, that he's speaking truly, that he actually does want them to offer this unbloody sacrifice, which is united with the bloody sacrifice of the cross. And so that's what happens when we come together for Mass. What happens? The priest, he takes bread, he takes wine, and he says the same words that Jesus said. He offers the Mass, offers the sacrifice of the Mass, the unbloody sacrifice, in union with the crucifixion. He offers it in the person of Jesus, as though the priest is taken over by Jesus, so that when the priest says those words of institution, take this and eat it, this is my body, take this and drink it, this is the chalice of my blood, it is Jesus himself who speaks those words, even though we experience it all in a human way. This is kind of the mysterious nature, and we could talk more about the mystery of the Mass, is that we experience it in space and time because we're limited by space and time. But we believe, because actually of what some Jewish understandings are about their worship, we believe that when we do this in memory of Jesus, that we're not doing it with our memory, but we're doing it with God's memory, which works outside of time. So that in offering the sacrifice of the Mass, we're not re-sacrificing Jesus, we're not repeating the sacrifice of the Last Supper, of the crucifixion, but instead we're actually transported outside of time because God's memory works outside of time. And so we're actually transported in a mystical way to this eternal, perpetual offering that Jesus makes of himself to God the Father. The letter to the Hebrews, chapters 9 and 10, are going to be helpful for us to understand that Jesus offered himself in sacrifice one time and for all time. But in offering himself once, it is also clearly laid out that his sacrifice is a perpetual sacrifice. So that even though in space and time, Jesus has already died, he's already risen, he's already ascended to the Father, even though in space and time that's already happened, in a mystical way, by his grace, that is perpetually happening in sacrifice. And so when we come together for the Mass, we are entering in and participating in that perpetual offering. Not offering it again, but we're participating in a new way in that perpetual offering. So this is, I think, hard for us to understand because we're so bodily, we're so sensible. And that's part of the mystery of it, is to enter into okay, I don't know that I fully understand this, but I do believe it. I do believe in consistency with Christian teaching for 2,000 years. I do believe that I'm entering into something that escapes me, something that escapes space and time. But nonetheless, I enter into it as best that I possibly can because I know that this is the worship that is most pleasing to God. Why? Because we're offering to him the thing that is most precious to him, which is the life of his Son. We're offering that in sacrifice, this most precious gift that we could possibly offer. So that's where I hope that's helpful for your understanding. And like I said, we'll talk more about these things as time goes on. God bless you.